So today we're honored to welcome 3 distinguished speakers from the University of Virginia. Renée Cummings, Assistant Professor of Practice in the Data Science in the School of Data Science. She's in the middle here. Mona Sloane, Assistant Professor of Data Science in the School of Data Science and Assistant Professor of Media Studies in the College and Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. Our moderator for the day is Michael Palmer. He's the Barbara Freed Director, Center for Teaching Excellence. And again, he'll moderate the conversation, and he's on the far right. In advance, let's go ahead and give them a warm, more than the score welcome. So before we begin, go ahead and silence the ringer on your phone. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the talk. And we ask that you hold your questions to the end. Michael will open up the floor for questions, and we'll run around with a microphone for you. And when that microphone gets to you, go ahead and raise your hands. When that microphone gets to you, speak directly into it. Make sure your question is loud and heard. And just ask one brief question. We love your comments, but questions make us really happy. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator. Michael Palmer joined the Center for Teaching Excellence in 2003. As director, he leads a dynamic team dedicated to advancing equity-informed and inclusive teaching practices, enhancing student engagement and belonging, and helping instructors find joy in their teaching. His work has earned national recognition from the Professional and Organizational Development Network in Higher Education. Michael currently teaches first and second seminars on the science of learning, living your best college life, and infinity. He is co-author of a recently published book, Developing High-Impact Course Design Institutes, A Model for Change. Again, please help me welcome this esteemed panel to More Than the Score. Michael, the microphone's all yours. Thanks, everybody.
Well, good morning, and thank you all for coming, and thanks to Althea and her team for organizing this. It's nice to have an intellectual community just before we go to a sporting community. Both are really valuable. Not that the two are mutually exclusive. I was thrust into this world of AI, like many of you, in November of 2022 when OpenAI released ChatGPT to the world. 3 months later, in January, my center, the Center for Teaching Excellence, held the first public forum at UVA focused on how this technology is going to disrupt teaching and learning. Since then, I've dabbled and tried to stay abreast of a technology that's changing faster than I think most of us can keep up with, which I'm glad to have the opportunity to talk with 2 people who have been thinking about it much longer than I have, and in much deeper ways. To set some things up, I'm going to talk about my perspective from teaching and learning. There's a model in the instructional technology world that helps us characterize learning technology innovation. It's called the SAMR model. And SAMR is an acronym for SAMR. The S stands for substitution, A, augmentation, M, modification, R, redefinition. And so if you look at a disruption of technology and innovation, you could say, where does it lie along that model? To give you an example, you can imagine an instructor in a class. They want to know who's there. They have them raise their hand. Really a kind of light engagement with their audience. If an instructor then uses a technology, a student response system, where they can use a device, these days it's a web-enabled device like a cell phone, to answer questions, multiple choice questions, short answer questions. So that's an innovation. If that instructor just uses it to take attendance, that's a substitution. They've replaced raising hands to clicking in a button. But if that instructor then asks meaningful questions to students to gauge understanding and uses the data that software produces to guide instruction, that would be an augmentation, right? If an instructor then uses that technology, student response system, and uses another pedagogical innovation, which is known as peer instruction, well, I might ask you a question.
You would click in with your answer. I would see the distribution. I would say, turn to your neighbor and find a neighbor who has a different answer than you and try to argue to figure out which one of you is right. After that short conversation, I'd have you click in, and as instructor, ideally what I would see is a shift to the right answer, right? So that is a modification. I've changed fundamentally the learning cycle for there. Imagine a student went through all of that and goes home and does the homework and still doesn't understand it. What do? They got to wait for office hours the next day. They got to maybe phone a friend. They spend hours on Google. Well, these days they don't have to do that, right? They can create a tutor bot. That tutor bot, they can feed that bot the lecture notes, which is augmented by other knowledge that the AI has. And they can, through a Socratic dialogue, could learn the material with the students, or help the student learn the material. And then the student could say, can you quiz me on this? Give me a bunch of quiz questions until I master this. The bot can ask a series of questions, guide instruction, provide critical feedback until the student has demonstrated mastery. Okay? That is redefinition. That looks nothing like what we've done before, but it's an alternative way to teach and learn. And this is where we're at. We're in a period of redefinition. Most pedagogical innovations, including technological innovations, only hit one of those levels, and mostly substitution or augmentation, whereas generative AI is a redefinition. It does all of those levels all at once. It's considered a general pedagogical innovation, but it's also considered a general purpose technology. And that's where our guests come in, because they have a much broader perspective than just teaching and learning. General purpose technologies are things that fundamentally change just about every aspect of life. Fire, electricity, the internet, possibly generative AI. Okay. So with that brief introduction of kind of the topic in my perspective, I want to introduce our speakers a little more formally. Dr. Mona Sloane, over here on my left, is Assistant Professor of Data Science and Media Studies at UVA, and a sociologist whose work examines the intersection of AI design, use, and policy. She is the convener of the public speaker series Co-opting AI, and she edits its companion book series. She co-chairs the National Academy's project on human and organizational factors in AI risk management, and she has a new book under contract. Yay, that's a big deal. It's called Co-opting AI, Society. Please help me once again welcome Professor Sloane. In the center here, Renée Cummings is Assistant Professor of Practice and Data Science, and she is an artificial intelligence data and tech ethicist. As UVA's first ever data activist in residence. I love that, data activist in residence. She's widely considered one of the top scholars in AI ethics. Professor Cummings received the 2023 VentureBeat AI Innovator Award and holds several influential fellow, advisory, and leadership roles, including positions at the Brookings Institute, the World Economic Forum's AI Governance Alliance, and the Global Academic Network at the Center for AI and Digital Policy. Please help me welcome Professor Cummings. I'll add one more thing in way of introducing both of them. They are busy, busy people. Everybody wants to hear from them. To get them both in the same room at the same time is, I don't know, maybe it's too far to say a miracle, but Renée flew in from South Africa yesterday to be here with you, so that's dedication. Really excited. We had some formal introductions. I want to do some informal introductions. One of my hobbies is cooking. And one thing that always goes on in my mind is, what does a Michelin star chef cook at home? Right? What is that expert who's the expert? What do they do with that expert thing when they're not doing the job? And so I thought we would play with that a little bit. I asked each of them, Renée and Mona, to give me some things in ways they use or don't use AI. I'm going to share these in pairs, and I'm going to ask them to fess up which one is them. So we'll see what we can learn. So one of you uses AI to create complex Excel formulas, and one of you uses it to come up with recipes. Renee, which of these describes a use you use AI for?
The recipe.
Yes. Tell us more.
Well, thank you so very much for having me. Let me say it's an absolute honor and a pleasure to be with you. Sometimes, I would say this, I'm trying to be more sustainable in my own practices. And I have found that over the last few years, I waste a lot of food. So I do a lot of shopping, I travel a lot, I'm never there to eat the food.
Yeah.
So sometimes when I'm home and now with Chat GPT, I look at what I have in the pantry, and sometimes it's some very weird stuff. And I would say,
it's like Iron Chef.
I have this, and I have this. What sort of recipe could I come up with? And I have been pretty successful, and they have been pretty tasty.
Tell us the best one.
Okay, the best one was a soup that combined some spinach, some mushrooms, something else. I can't remember. Pumpkin, lots of aromatics, and it was really quite delicious,
Nice.
Actually. Yeah.
Okay, so tell the truth. When it doesn't turn out well, is it the AI's fault or the cook's?
Well, you know what? I've not had a not turn out well
Okay.
experience just yet. It is always. I think, of course, it's the ability just to gather all the recipes that are out there. Of course, the recipes I'm not familiar with. I don't consider myself a Michelin anything. And, I'm just really not that, spectacular when it comes to creative recipes.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what a hallucination looks like in a recipe. So I don't know. You're like, what? You're going to put what in where? Yeah, okay. So Mona, that means you're doing Excel stuff. Tell us about that.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Michael. It's always great to be with Renee. And thank you, Althea, for bringing us all together. And it's so great to see you. Are you ready for a good game day? Yes. Beautiful out. Yes, I'm the geek with the Excel instructions. I am not very good at creating complex formulas in Excel. I was unfortunately not trained in that, and I don't have the time to sit down and do a little YouTube tutorial. I had a very concrete Excel formula need, which is very related to this institution. I really needed a spreadsheet that allowed me to track my research expenses vis-a-vis the different grants that I had. And I wanted a sort of red flag when I only had 18 months to spend out the grant, 12 and 6. Because it takes some time to get money out of the door. It takes a lot of effort to get it in the door, but it also takes time to get it out of the door in a public institution. And so I just couldn't do that myself, but it's absolutely essential for the running of my lab. And all the different grants and projects that I run, and paying our wonderful students and all of that. And so I wrangled Chat GPT concretely. That was the model I used to help me come up with a template that would allow me to do that. The different grants per line and the different expenses, and it actually successfully did that, and now I have a wonderful template that turns yellow when I have 18 months and red when I have 6 months. And I was so happy about that, I almost cried, because it's absolutely essential, and I did share it with all of my colleagues, and that was actually something extremely useful. It's very specific, but I loved that.
So as a fellow Excel nerd, that gets me very excited. I want to go try it out.
I'll share it with you.
Yeah. Although I do like the tinkering of the just figuring out I like doing that, right?
So with the dates,
So-
you go in on the date and it knows the day.
Yeah.
See, that's
I like to
advanced.
code that though, so I don't know.
Good on you.
But it takes time, so if I didn't have time, I guess I wouldn't do that. So one of you uses AI for comparative analysis, and another one uses it to turn bulleted lists into prose to speed up the writing process, I suspect. Mona, which of these is you?
I'm the bullet point person. And this is also related to my work. I like to give extensive feedback to my students' essays that can end up as a long, expanded bullet points. And what I do is I ask ChatGPT to summarize this, and then I heavily edit that text. And that saves me a lot of time simply because I don't have to type it up. I guess I could just dictate it, but I found that extremely useful. And I will also say that the tone of these models can be quite flat and the same, and that you can provide the same tone for all of the students and like elevate when you want to. So, or underline certain things when you want to. So that was, again, useful.
Yeah, well, these tools are getting so good that if you feed it enough of your own text, it learns that tone.
If
that
you
you
allow
want.
it,
If
I
you allow
have
it,
that
yes.
switched off.
Yeah. Oh, good. Okay. So Renee, that leaves you as the comparative analysis. What is that?
Certainly. So much of my work is traveling globally and working with governments when it comes to analyzing what they're doing with AI governance and, of course, helping them implement AI. My trip to South Africa was just that, looking at the ways in which governments can implement AI in the public sector with impact and, of course, ethically. So what I do is when I'm, of course, looking at what governments are doing, I've got to make comparative analysis. I look at size of the population, AI readiness, AI maturity, and I'm able to compare each government to see what they're doing, what their competitors are doing, what the people in the region are doing, sometimes what their neighbors are doing and they're not doing. So generative AI works very good with that. However, I have to really read it down to the end because there are hallucinations in there, and sometimes they may tell you a government is doing something or an agency in a country is doing something, and they're really not doing it in that way just yet. So it really works nicely to situate the countries against each other, to see the kinds of frameworks they're dealing with, and of course the kinds of international agencies they're working with, and the kinds of investments they're putting into AI governance, and of course AI implementation across a whole society and whole government type of implementation.
Yeah, I appreciate it in all their answers, this underlying unspoken thing about risk, right? And then what do you do to ensure that the information you're getting is reliable and accurate? So thanks for giving us a peek behind the curtain. We're gonna get started, and I'd like you to hear from both of our guests first in a little bit more detail. I've asked them to come up with a provocation that they're going to spend roughly 5 minutes responding to. So they've done some thinking about this provocation. So Renee, let's start with you. Help us understand why you think ChatGPT is or isn't the end-all or be-all to AI.
Well, certainly, most of the times when you ask people about AI or people tell you about AI, they usually tell you about ChatGPT. I'm using ChatGPT now, and AI is absolutely spectacular, and it's the most fantastic thing they've ever done. Of course, ChatGPT is making everyone feel more intelligent, more creative, more dynamic, more personable. And often, I don't want to kill their joy, because you want people to be happy. You want people to feel
It's an illusion, though, right?
But still, you want people to feel, when people feel as though they're delivering excellence, that's the beautiful thing. When people feel as though they're effective and they're efficient, or they're being more expedient, those are great things. So I don't want to take that joy away from them and then start to tell them all the difficult stuff, like an algorithm could undermine your agency, your autonomy. An algorithm could impact self-determination and self-identity, or looking at questions of democracy. So for me, it's always a good starting point, because they believe that, this is AI, but I think they're always intrigued to find out more about those risks, very, very intrigued to find out about the ethical approaches that are very necessary. And being a member of the School of Data Science, I always say there is absolutely no AI without data. So the conversation of data for me is the most critical. The conversation about data governance is indeed very crucial, and understanding that if we are to really think about AI and think about the future of intelligence and innovate when it comes to intelligence, we've got to understand data and, of course, the future of data. So oftentimes people always just say AI, ChatGPT, and I always say that's just one brand. There are many, many brands. There's a whole buffet of AI out there, and if you just focus on that one element, you miss some of the bigger questions of how this is going to impact society. Of course, we always speak about AI as a socio-technical system, and looking at the ways in which it impacts many of the social systems that govern and guide us.
Yeah, thank you. I've given lots of talks in AI, and I often ask, how many people are you using it? And you get a smattering of folks. And I ask, how many of you have a Roomba, that robot vacuum cleaner? And a lot more hands go up. Yeah, you're using AI. That is guiding that little machine you have. So you mentioned the socio-technical aspect. Mona, your provocation is AI is a social phenomenon, not a technical one. Tell us about that, because that doesn't make any sense to me.
Okay, great. I love that. Thank you.
Makes some sense, but
so I think what we tend to forget when we are presented with shiny new objects, as Renée just described, is that all of these technical objects or infrastructures that really allow us to leap forward as a society in certain ways are decisions ultimately that we make as a society or as communities. And they are outcomes of institutions that we have built. They are outcomes of narratives that we have landed on. They are outcomes of goals that maybe we have set. And these kinds of social decisions give rise to the technology in the first place. And artificial intelligence is an example of that. The idea that we use automated decision systems to accelerate bureaucratic decision-making is old. Now we have deep learning, which is a particular technique used in AI, and we can do this faster. We're doing bureaucracy faster. That's a social system. And the problem with the narrative that this is a technology, a quasi-natural phenomenon that is just happening to us and we have to cope with it, we're seeing that a lot with AI, is, I think, first of all, not true, again, because it came from society, it is in society, it is used to organize society. But also, if we accept the idea that it is just happening to us, then there is no room for collective decision-making in there. There's no room for acknowledging that we are all experts in our own lives and that we all use these technologies. And I would actually claim that all of you already are AI experts because you have AI in your life. AI is a social infrastructure at this point. And that sort of really reduces the idea space. And I find that problematic. And so this is why, as a sociologist, come out and say AI is social, so we can actually talk about what a future with AI could look like. And this is sort of doubly important in the era of AI because AI is a predictive technology. Its whole design focus is on leveraging very large data sets to create predictions about phenomena, including language. This is what generative AI is. This is what large language models do. They predict the word tokens because they've understood the relationship between, or the, say, the architecture of, especially the English language. And so we are still, if you really strict, we're still dealing with correlations. We're not dealing in causation in the space of AI. But because AI is infrastructural, because it mediates social relationships, the idea that everything is predictable also seeps into the logics of social organization. And I find that extra problematic because that sort of, in an infrastructural way, limits us very much. If we all buy into the idea that there's just one future and we just need the top model to predict what's going to happen, then there's no space for deliberation, for new ideas, for creativity. And that's why I say all AI is social, to get us out of that grip.
Yeah, I would. If we surveyed UVA faculty, I think the vast majority would say it's being done to them. It's a question of how do you get them to recognize there's some agency and there's a voice in a conversation that can be had. That it's not a be-all, end-all thing. There's more to that conversation. So I appreciate those comments. I'm now going to ask a mix of questions of Mona and Renée that are focused on policy, ethics, governance. We're going to try to cover a lot of ground in a short amount of time. Some of the questions I've authored, some of them are questions that we got as you registered. Some AI helped me with, and I think you'll be able to pick those out when I ask them. At the end, I'm going to give you an opportunity to ask questions, so take notes. And as Althea said, get those nice and sharp because the pressure's on you, not me at that point. All right, so let's dive in. And Mona, I want to start with you. And I think it'll pick up on where you were just at. There's a lot of hype out there. What generative AI is, what it can do. And it's hard to know exactly what it's even capable of doing today. I mean, I mean today because yesterday could have been different, right? And I'm going to give an example later where I discovered something new yesterday and I wish I hadn't. Can you tell us briefly the capabilities of AI today and project out 5 years? What's it going to be able to do? What's myth and what's reality?
All right, those are two different questions, because if I could have the answer to the first one,
Okay, well,
would
we'll
probably
focus.
be very wealthy.
What is it capable now? Start there.
All right, so there is a difference between rule-based AI, like your Roomba, or the deep learning systems and sort of generative AI. And that's still a very useful distinction. Rule-based AI means you just give it a set of rules and it sort of learns, and it originated in expert systems, sort of like were developed of the Second World War. So what is happening today with deep learning is that a model can actually map relationships between data points in space and create predictions based on that. So it's gotten really good at understanding language, large language models. It's good at that, right? And we all sort of experience that and operate with that when we are asking for summaries, or we are asking to create summaries, or recipes, or whatever it is. Language is, of course, fundamental to social organization and society, and that's why we're seeing this sort of wide deployment, and we're also seeing interactions with computers change, so we can give a computer a language-based instruction and it now can turn it into code, for example, or other outputs, which is exciting. I do not think that we will end up in a situation where we have the LLM overlords eradicating all of humanity. I do appreciate the warnings that we hear of the risks of AI. I am concerned that they are distracting us from the more evidence-based risks that we're seeing, such as error rates in facial recognition or hallucinations in high-stakes situations. What it will do, I think, at best case scenario, personally, I think it will help us do the things we have to do on a bureaucracy level, maybe faster at some point. I don't think we're going to see massive increase in productivity. Actually, we're already seeing evidence that that might have been a false narrative. If you read particular outlets, you can already see that. Mm-hmm. Worst case scenario, the AI bubble is gonna pop, and we'll see what will happen then. But I do agree with Renee that it's one phenomenon among many, and it is also one that we should not let take over other mega events and trends that we're seeing across society. So I'm gonna leave it at that. Don't mean to be the bummer, but.
Well, I guess that was optimistic.
Ask me about agentic AI at some point.
It's not a Terminator moment, I guess, is what you told me. So
no, it's not a Terminator moment, but we're traveling towards agentic AI, which means giving AI systems permission to do things for us without oversight. So booking tables at restaurants or travel. And there are already products out there that sort of are testing that. One of them, for example, is the new browser by Perplexity called Comet that you can give agentic permissions. And so I think that is a security risk, because once you give it an agentic AI your passwords, we don't actually know what happens. What we do know is that companies who create AI don't really have a good track record in testing things in controlled environments first before they deploy them. So we have to watch that a little. So agentic AI for bureaucracy maybe, but also maybe risky.
Yeah, so Renee, I want to switch to you and pick up on that. Is Pandora's box fully open? How does, is there a way for policy to get ahead of this, to ensure ethical use, to ensure protection of intellectual property, to save our environment? Can we do that at this point?
Well, the challenge is this. the technology is always ahead of the law. So long before I started to work in AI, I worked, of course, and still work as a criminologist and criminal psychologist and terrorism expert. That's where I come from. And most of my last 20 years spent in homicide, really working with police agencies globally when it comes to homicide investigation. So my work in AI comes from criminal justice, where we've been using algorithms and using data-driven systems for the last maybe 25 years, looking at how we predict sentencing and, of course, questions around parole and questions around public safety. So criminology is a space that is still grappling with AI and whether or not AI can be totally effective. Right. As Mona spoke about facial recognition technologies, and when we think about questions around wrongful arrest and misidentification and the ways in which these algorithms are not doing what they were expected to do, and many of them are behaving pretty badly and going very rogue. But the question is this: we now are embracing and engaging with this technology. So we have no other opportunity but try to govern this technology. The challenge is the technology is happening so quickly, and government and governance are not real-time practices. So you have countries that are really struggling because data has become the greatest global geopolitical game changer. Data is now the greatest commodity. Every country that I go to, it's about their data. How to protect their data, how to steward their data, how to govern their data, and how to get more data. Because we know data is about intelligent decision-making, it's about hindsight, foresight, insight, and oversight. That's what data is, and countries and governments and agencies, they want that. That's what they want to progress when they think about their sustainable development goals and their vision for their country. The challenge is this: AI, and we're seeing it not only in the generative AI space, the ChatGPT, we're seeing it in healthcare. I mean, AI can do some pretty spectacular things when we think about generative AI in precision medicine. Mm-hmm. And you're seeing some extraordinary things coming out of countries, in particular Switzerland, that's doing some amazing stuff. When we think about Alzheimer's and Alzheimer's research, and we're seeing what AI could do in that space. When we think about longevity and living healthier, longer lives, we're seeing some great things. The challenge is this: we need to bring a more broad-based ethical approach to the ways in which we are doing the technology. We need to focus on safety. But we need to move these questions and these concerns and these conversations outside of the halls, outside of academia, outside of the scientific spaces. And we need to have real-time conversations with the people who are impacted. Right. So when I spoke about ChatGPT being the be-all and end-all for some individuals, when you start to drill down into the risks, when you start to drill down into the crises, when you start to drill down into intellectual properties and proprietary rights and how we set up proprietary versus human rights, then people start to understand the power of this technology. Data and AI combined is about an extraordinary amount of power. It's about thinking about when you're using this technology, as you said, if you have one of those robotic vacuum cleaners, which I don't have, you also need to know that every corner of your house, that data is being taken by that vacuum, and now that data for your house is somewhere. So there's someone somewhere who knows exactly what the interior of your house looks like.
And they know I have a golden retriever because it goes around the golden retriever.
Right, and it knows everything. Most people don't even know the sensors in our cell phone are able to detect the way we walk. If we have a particular kind of walk, if we have a disability, these are real things, real kind of information that companies want. So for me, one of the defining factors with this question about AI that really brought me into this space was the fact that these automated risk tools were continuously denying certain individuals parole. And some of these individuals decided that they would challenge the algorithm, because one of the most basic tenets of the criminal justice system is our ability to face our accuser. So they decided they wanted to know what was in the black box. And that was the first time when we started to realize that machines carry risk, but also the first time we saw trade secrets and proprietary rights versus human rights and civil rights. So there are these big questions around data rights and digital rights. And of course, my work as the first data activist in residence comes from that space. So we're using this technology. We have no choice but to collaborate with this technology when we think about the future of intelligence, how intelligence is constantly being innovated, but we've also got to understand the questions of intellectual property, the questions of proprietary rights, the questions of risk. So this is it. Whether or not we're going to ever be ahead of the technology? No, we're not. Are we going to know what AI is going to do in 5 years? We probably don't, because we don't know what AI is going to do tomorrow. We don't know what AI is doing right now, and that's the biggest challenge. I always say the one thing about AI that we always know is that we don't know about AI. And AI continues to do things, and we can call it hallucination to try to sort of desensitize it, but we're seeing things that are very, very questionable, but then we're seeing things that could be extremely spectacular. And that's the dichotomy, that's the double-edged sword that we've got to navigate. So that's why ethics so critical, safety so critical, and really taking this conversation into the homes, you know, the kitchen table, the places where we've got to understand, yeah, we're doing something great with ChatGPT, but we're also feeding ChatGPT an extraordinary amount of data about us that's being extracted, that's being exploited. Some communities, there are questions around erasure when it comes to their data. So we've got to have that conversation about data. Data as an extension of our personhood. Most people don't think about that. You know, we say biometrics, it sounds fantastic, but what is it? Our thumbprint, our eye, the way we wink, you know, the ways in which we think. What about our creativity that we're constantly feeding into these GPTs, that extraction of our brain data, our intellect. So there's so much to think about.
Yeah, this could be the whole rest of the day. Yeah, one of the scariest things I'd read is a police department that was taking eyewitness data of suspects, having Gen AI create images of that person, and then running that through databases to identify the perpetrator. That's scary, right? And you know, there's lots of talk about these tools are free. They're not free. You're paying with your data, right? And so there's just so many ethical questions there. I'm gonna build on that just a little bit. The film director Guillermo del Toro is coming out with a remake of Frankenstein, and in interviews of lead up to the release of that, journalists have been asking him about, is this your commentary on AI? And one of the things he said during those interviews, and I'll quote him, he says, "I'm not afraid of artificial intelligence. I'm afraid of natural stupidity." What do you say about that?
Want to go?
You go. I feel you're on the roll.
Well,
is it the technology we should be afraid of, or the people building the technology, or consuming the technology, or?
Well, it's not either or.
Okay.
Because I don't think we need to be afraid of anything. And when I think of the story of Frankenstein, I don't think about the monster. I think about the brilliance of the extraordinary woman who wrote the story.
Yeah. Mary Shelley, yes.
Right.
Yes.
So that's it. All our lives we keep thinking about the monster. Well, what about that creativity? What about that intelligence? What about a woman doing something at that time that was not heard of? What about a woman in the space of science who was really thinking about science and thinking about leading in science? So that's it. That's it right there, how we approach this technology. So I would say this about AI. AI is, for me, a language of the now. This is how we're engaging. This is how we're communicating with each other. And as you said, if you think you're not using AI, I always say, trust and believe AI has been using you for a very long time, because all our data has been scraped and packaged and repackaged and repurposed and resold. I often tell people, what if I were to tell you your data was doing slave labor in a country that you have no clue about and you've never been? Because that's what we see. We see data that's scraped, let's say from the US, that's being used to train models in India, in Africa, that's now coming back to data that's being used in Silicon Valley to build, and we gave no—
That we're paying for.
Right, and we've given no permission for our data to do that. Our data have gone places our passports have never seen. So we have got to think about that question as well, right? So for me, human intelligence, human creativity, there is nothing more extraordinary than that. And we will never get an AI to do that. We could get AI to augment it, to help us brainstorm it, to stretch our imaginations just a little more, but you're gonna need that initial spark. The spark to create AI comes from a human. It didn't come from a machine, right? All of these technologies and approaches are so critical. So for me, I'm very committed to two things. I'm committed to intergenerational intelligence, because I look at the questions of AI at the intersection of ageism, which is something that I'm grappling with more and more, and really thinking again about how do we innovate, how do we augment, how do we build better systems, how do we enhance what we're doing as human beings with the technology. So it's not about fear, it's about awareness, it's about information, it's about education and understanding, to me, which is probably the most powerful system of our time.
Yeah. I appreciate you picked up education, and so I'm gonna shift and I have a daughter here at UVA. She's a second year, and by all accounts, she is thriving. She's loving her experience here, which makes me very happy. But like her peers, like many of her peers, both here at UVA and at other institutions, they're nervous about the future. And as the more you read and all the hype I think I mentioned around AI, it's hard to imagine what the job market's going to look like in 5 years or in a year from now. So what should my daughter and every other young adult right now do to prepare, and I'm looking at you, Mona, prepare for a world that has AI everywhere all the time? What should they do now?
I think they're already doing a lot. I think that young people are always early adopters. They are very, or can be very critical users of technology, and you know this better than I do. There is a lot of conversation around AI use in the classroom that is entirely focused on plagiarism. And we've been sort of, on both sides, students and professors have been boxed in by this sort of worry that students are gonna cheat on their tests and on their essays, but that's not the point. I mean, that narrow conversation is just a symptom of how narrowly we've come to think about learning. And I wish we would actually use this moment of crisis and of anxiety to think more broadly about how we want to learn how to think. And I think that our students can actually be wonderful collaborators in figuring out good conversations here. When I talk to my students about generative AI, Claude, ChatGPT, what have you, they use it as tutors, for example, but they are so quick in figuring out the limitations of this technology. They're absolutely not naive whatsoever. They are anxious, of course, about the job market, but we are living in anxious times generally right now. I think we need to acknowledge that. We are also seeing the real impact of these polarizing AI narratives for entry-level candidates. So we are inundated with the claim that AI can automate the easy jobs, right? The kinds of things that we might ask an intern to do or an entry-level employee. That's sort of turning out to not be true because of various problems that are inherent to the technology, such as hallucinations, but also a human or a worker or a job is more than just a portfolio of tasks. It's actually meaningfully stringing these together and making decisions. And so right now, we're seeing students having trouble getting these entry-level jobs. So we have a sort of almost breakdown of the master apprentice social contract that is happening because of these narratives and this AI hyping. But if you look closely, that's already changing. And there's already the realization that, even though you can use generative AI to complete a task, you cannot fully automate many of these jobs. What I recommend my students do, and I actually did change my classroom policies this semester, is that they really, really recommit to learning how to learn. I have a phones in bags policy and laptops closed policy. Laptops can come out when they get a research task, but they are asked to take handwritten notes throughout, including on their readings. I had zero resistance to that because they have understood that this is their opportunity to learn how to think critically. And we're having amazing conversations in the classroom. They're really there. It's such a joy. And I think if we can collectively recommit to that, I think we're in pretty good shape, especially here at UVA, where we have a really healthy learning culture.
If you're looking for topics for future, more than this for, we can talk about the impact of grades and how they negatively are shaping this entire conversation, because I think the conversation would be very different if the grades weren't in the mix here. I want to get to audience comment or questions here pretty quickly, or time flies. But I have some rapid fire questions for them, kind of one word answer, maybe a very short phrase, and you can bounce back and forth. What's AI's biggest superpower?
Geopolitics.
Geopolitics.
Forecasting.
Okay. What's one thing you'd banned AI from doing?
Therapy.
Yes.
I'm going to plus one that.
Plus one that, okay. What industry will AI disrupt the most?
Positively, healthcare.
Okay, yeah, thank you. We tend to think of the negatives when we have this conversation. I appreciate that.
I think AI is already pretty good at automating low-level, low-stakes graphic design tasks. I think that's actually a space that's already being disrupted.
Yeah, which then gets at the displacement of the intellectual property and creativity. Funniest AI fail you've seen?
Humor. It can never be good.
I just get annoyed when it does that. It's funny. The funniest, it just can't, when you ask a generative AI system to create an image and put text on the image, it can't do it. And it comes up with typos. You cannot get rid of it easily. So that's funny, but very annoying.
It's very annoying if you can't create an image.
Yes.
Scarier phrase, AI is biased or AI is sentient?
One's true, one's false.
I'll go with that.
Say it again.
One is true, one is false.
Yeah. Which is which?
AI is not sentient, and it's biased. So all data sets have a bias. Yeah.
Since this is a game day, I figured we would end one, and actually AI helped me with this. What is the AI equivalent of a fumble?
That's a good one. I'm going to pass on that.
You're going to pass that one.
I think, our students would be really good at answering that. It just can't, it cannot grasp evolving context. So if it goes in the wrong direction, and you want the conversation or the wrangling of copy or whatever it is to go into a different direction, the context sort of collapses on it, and you have to often restart the chat to actually go back to zero, which really challenges the whole efficiency narrative. I'm going to say that, at that time I could have just done it myself. So that's a fumble, but as with everything, that's a fumble on scale.
Yeah. I think there are many things with uses I've had before where it's like, no, I'm never doing this again because I can do it much quicker on my own. So yeah, I appreciate that. We're open up for some questions here. We have maybe a couple. Raise your hand. We got a gentleman up here, some in the middle. We'll take as many as we can. We'll try to keep our answers short. We'll see what we get. Go ahead.
We're sitting here in a research university, and many people, like myself, use artificial intelligence or internet to search out information, part of our research. And what I've discovered by my own personal experience is that many of these algorithms appear to score the value of bits of information by the amount of discussion, like the quantity of discussion about a particular topic. But old information, or relatively old, doesn't have the amount of discussion around it because there was no internet, there was no broadcasting. And so I have found that say fundamental information in certain areas gets lost. That if I search today for information, the same information that I searched 5 years ago for, all the information that was relevant and valuable from my previous search is now not present. Mm-hmm. It's like there's a voting, and the voting is current discussion outweighs original discussion of various topics. So my concern is there a way to defeat the sort of like the time value loss of information just because the technology has allowed a broader and more intense discussion, which scores more highly. So people don't understand what the roots of an issue are as much as they used to be able to. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I'm going to take that as an opportunity to underscore some of the limitations of artificial intelligence for a fundamental thing we all do every day, at some point at least, which is information retrieval. So with non-AI-driven information retrieval systems, your library catalog, you probably all learn how to use that at some point, and you probably all know how to use Boolean operators and or to actually create a search. That sort of traditional information retrieval technique closely matches what you express in your search query to the actual material and the data that is in the corpus, and exactly the relationship that you express it, right? You say, I want to retrieve papers by Renée Cummings on policy, not ethics, right? It's very clear what you want. And a traditional information retrieval system will give you that because it's sort of really boxed in. AI will interpret your search query. Again, we're dealing with probabilities here. It will say, well, you said you want only policy and not ethics, but how about both? And how about Michael Palmer's work as well? So there's a machine interpretation that is happening here that creates some of the problems that you see. What you added onto that was that all in the post.com era, everything that we put into a search engine and our engagement with the internet, which is a huge information database in some ways and not in others, all of that becomes the training data for these AI systems that now become infrastructural to information retrieval systems, to the organization of social life. So you have a double whammy, if you will, that is happening here through the way in which these systems work differently, in which we use them, and in which this use becomes the basis for creating new AI systems and keep training them to be very specific. So one of the things we absolutely have to do is teach our students that difference and make very, very clear that they have agency and responsibility to search for information that is relevant, to search for what was before. That is the creative and critical thinking part that we really have to sort of massage and allow them to learn that. One of the things I do in the classroom is I do allow generative AI when they get a research task, but they have to use a system that gives them the sources that is retrieval augmented generation based, so the searches only across a pre-specified corpus, and they have to go to the original source and then go from there. So they learn that agency. But thank you for sharing that. It's an ongoing issue, but we have the opportunity to at least highlight it by teaching our students how to think about it.
I think that's a case where a recency bias existed even without AI, right? And so that is a learning opportunity regardless of whether the tool is doing something or not. We have another question up here.
My name's Bellamy Brown. I'm a burgeoning AI strategist and trusted advisor. This is directed more towards Professor Cummings. As Virginia grows as an AI hub, what can public servants do to ensure AI deployment services or serves equity and justice and not just efficiency?
Thank you so very much for that question. And you would be proud to know in July we had a large convening of public sector and government employees here at the Weldon Cooper Center, and I was actually dealing with those exact questions. And it's about understanding the technology. It's about understanding those ethical questions. It's about understanding the biases when it comes to those critical risks. And I think if you're able to do that, you bring an extraordinary amount of due diligence and sophistication in the ways in which you're thinking about the technology. For me, I always say when we think about AI, when we think about its application, we've always got to think about due process, equity, and fairness. I come from the criminal justice system, so due process guides everything that I think about. We've also got to think about duty of care, which is so critical to this technology, questions around liability and redress. We've also got to think about the duty to warn, to speak about those limitations, and to ensure people know what those disclaimers are and make those real-time disclosures. And it always comes back to that question of due diligence. You've really got to bring a very sophisticated and critical understanding to the technology. Of course, it could make us, again, more effective and more efficient, but we've got to look at the impacts, and we've really got to look at the long-term impacts, because what we may be doing in the now has extraordinary, and sometimes questionable approaches when we think about what that future is going to look like.
Just briefly on that, procurement. I think procurement is actually the place where we can enact some of these questions and where we can meaningfully think about stakeholder engagement and stakeholder expertise. Procurement traditionally is not set up anywhere to deal with these broader questions. So that is a concrete process in place where we have to become much smarter about actually asking these questions, come up with institution, stakeholder, and situation, and profession-specific guardrails that are enforced, because let's not forget, procurement has a lot of power. We have a lot of power as UVA. When we buy a system, those contracts are worth a lot. And one of the things we're doing here at UVA through my lab is we're working to establish a student technology council, where we actually are working to develop a group of students representative of all the 12 schools who support decision-making around procurement, around data and technology governance and innovation as an organized voice. And we hope that this can be a blueprint, not just for other universities, but for these questions in the public sector, but even in the corporate sector as well.
Amito, we have time for one more question. Brief question. No pressure there.
Thank you so much. Gosh. So my question is about AI in healthcare, and specifically, ask do we see as the future benefits of AI in healthcare, kind of in contrast to a lot of the data privacy concerns we have about health, Washington's My Data Privacy Act, and some of the other ongoing concerns about protecting personal medical data against those potential benefits.
So I will say that those questions are never going to go away. They're just going to become more and more critical as we intersect AI with healthcare. But I come from that sort of brain science space. And when we're looking at the kind of development and real-time research and applications of AI in any sort of thing to do with the brain and how we think about illness and how we think about just longevity, I'm really impressed with what I'm seeing, and really committed to that space of precision healthcare within the context of the fact that it needs to be ethical, it needs to be equitable, and it needs to be non-exploitive as well.
To wrap up, I thought I would ask each of them to share their hope for AI.
I hope that we can make AI less extractive in the data sense and in the environmental sense. We are seeing huge data centers gobbling up enormous amounts of energy and water, which can cause localized droughts and spikes in energy prices. So I hope we can tech fix that. I also hope that we are able to remove ourselves from this tech deterministic AI hype space in which we have no agency, and actually move towards conversations that are asking concrete questions around the utility of AI. And I hope that we can do so bearing in mind that we're talking about an infrastructure here, and that we should probably be talking about it in the sense of a public infrastructure.
Renee, what's your hope?
I think mine would be that now that we're able to augment what we're doing with the machines and to co-collaborate with these machines, and the machines are taking away a lot of the work and the mundane work that we do. For me, it's about AI now giving us more time to be human, more time to be kind, more time to understand what love and positivity and family, these things mean. And I always say we don't want to get to a point where we need to build an algorithm to teach us what it means to be human again.
That's lovely. Yeah. I hope we have more time to go to football games, right?
Yeah.
So thank you very much. Appreciate you coming today. Go Who's Go. Please join me in thanking Mona, Renee, and our host.
Yes, thank you. Thank you all for coming and spending your morning with us, and we especially want to thank our speakers for volunteering to spend their time with us as well. We have some little gifts for you, and I'll give those out. But I wanted to bring your attention to some of the other programs that we have going on. We'll pull up a QR code and you can find our website. And this talk is being recorded, and so we'll post that to our podcast library. And that link is up there as well. So find that in about a week and a half and share with others and enjoy the day. Thank you.